Health Secretary warns COVID cases may increase, but residents should not rush to the emergency ward. Smuggled COVID medicines found at the airport. 1 million people protest in France over retirement age. Good evening and welcome to TVB News. Secretary for Health Lo Chung-mau says he expects the number of COVID infections would rise after the isolation orders for coronavirus patients are removed at the end of this month. While he said he is confident the spike in cases would not overwhelm the medical system, he urged infected citizens not to rush to the emergency department at public hospitals.
Starting January 30th, Hong Kong will scrap its 5-day isolation mandate for those who tested COVID positive, and asymptomatic patients will be able to go to work. Secretary for Health Lo Chung-mau said on a radio program, the city is experienced enough to deal with the possible large-scale outbreaks following the policy shift. He said the high number of COVID cases recorded in late December and early January was similar to the city's peak of early 2022. Lo said based on previous experience, Hong Kong was able to deal with the situation steadily. As the daily tally continues its downward trajectory with a higher level of immunity among the public, Lo said this new style of pandemic management helps the city take on the virus as a new normal. Admitting that the public might feel a bit of unease during this transition period, Lo suggested Hong Kongers to refer to pre-pandemic practices in handling illnesses such as fever and sore throats. Lo said those with severe symptoms should seek medical attention, but people with mild cases could still return to work. To ease the burden on medical staff, COVID-positive cases should not rashly head to emergency wards, Lo said. Instead, infected people can seek medical attention at general outpatient and designated clinics.
Lo Chung-mau said the government is not giving up on the pandemic. Authorities will continue monitoring relevant statistics. They include the amount of coronavirus in sewage samples and the number of COVID patients at public hospitals and in private clinics. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
Starting the end of the month, the government will scrap issuing isolation orders to people who have contracted the virus. From then on, COVID patients will need a doctor's certificate to get sick leave from work.
In about 10 days' time, COVID patients can freely move around the city and take part in activities such as dining out. So technically, there will be no way to know if the customers or staff around you are positive for the virus. This customer says there's no use being overly concerned because there's a chance you'll be infected anyway once you're out on the street. A restaurant operator decided to play it safe. He said people working in the food and beverage sector have the duty to protect customers, especially caterers who are serving them food. The operator said he will require infected employees to show proof of a positive RAT, and they will be entitled to paid sick leave. He added he will assess and review the situation for other sectors 2 months later. According to the employment ordinance, employers are required to give allowances and days off for employees given at least 4 days of sick leave by doctors. Family doctor Chang Chi-man said the principle of giving out sick leave to COVID patients will be the same for patients with upper respiratory infections. He said patients with fever or fatigue will usually be given 1 to 3 days of sick leave, adding the nature of their work will be taken into account. Lawmaker Lam Chun Sing believes the government seems to have handed the responsibility to doctors and urged the authorities to set out clearer guidelines.
The city reported 3,789 new COVID cases, slightly lower than yesterday. 93 of them are imported. More than 40 patients died, bringing the city's death toll in this pandemic wave to 12,839. Meanwhile, things have apparently improved at community testing centres after many people hoping to travel to the mainland rushed to get tested in the past few days. Today, far fewer people are lining up. 7 testing centres have moved their working hours earlier. Secretary for Health Lo Chung-mau stressed the city has a daily testing capacity of 150,000. The government has also made a new layout on the reservation website, making it easier to see the booking status of various facilities. Hong Kong Customs yesterday seized $7 million worth of suspected COVID drugs at the Hong Kong International Airport. 2 Indian men aged between 40 and 43 were arrested. Customs officers found 2,100 boxes of suspected COVID drugs after inspecting 4 check-in carton boxes carried by one of the men. After a follow-up investigation, they arrested another man at the airport after they found out 2 of the carton boxes belonged to him. The duo have been charged with 1 count of importing prohibited articles not under and in accordance with an import license and 1 count of possession of Part 1 poison. They will appear at the Kowloon City Magistrates Courts tomorrow. Former lawmaker Lam Cheuk Ting and other 2 defendants were acquitted of perverting the course of justice by a district court today. The trio were charged with instructing or inducing a man to delete digital content showing faces of protesters who participated in a rally in Tuen Mun back in 2019 during the anti-government protests. The district court judge said Lam was showing goodwill at the time. Former lawmaker Ted Hui was one of the defendants in the case, but he jumped bail and left the city 2 years ago. The court has issued arrest warrants for Hui. In France, at least 1 million people protested on the streets of Paris and other cities amid a nationwide strike against plans by the government to raise the retirement age by 2 years. But President Emmanuel Macron insists he will press ahead with the proposed pension reforms. Tracy Furness has more.
The French Interior Ministry put the number of protesters on the streets of Paris Thursday at 80,000, but the unions say it was more like 400,000. The strike and protests aim to force the government to back down on plans to push up the standard retirement age from 62 to 64. This 18-year-old student said that the reform will negatively impact young people as more jobs will be retained by older people, which means more unemployment for young people. Others worry the reform will hit harder for low-income workers who do not live as long as the wealthy. Police detained 38 protesters in the capital and fired tear gas on the fringes of the Paris protests when black-clad, masked individuals in hoodies hurled projectiles at them. Emboldened by the mass show of resistance, French unions announced new strikes and protests on January 31st.
L'objectif pour nous, c'est
CGT Union General Secretary Philippe Martinez said, "Seeing the level of discontent this movement can only intensify, the problem is in the hands of the government. It's their bill, and if they withdraw it, there will be no more mobilization." President Emmanuel Macron, speaking from Spain, acknowledged the public discontent but said that the reform must go ahead to save French pensions. Pushing back the retirement age by 2 years and extending the pay-in period would bring an additional 17.7 billion euros in annual pension contributions, allowing the system to break even by 2027. Strikes severely disrupted transport, schools and other public services with more than 200 rallies staged around France. Tracy Furness, TVB News.
Still head on tonight's news. Chief Executive John Lee visits Lunar New Year Fair in Victoria Park. Actor Alec Baldwin charged with involuntary manslaughter. British Prime Minister fails to wear seatbelt while riding in a car. Welcome to TVB News. Last month's Composite Consumer Price Index rose by 2% year-on-year, which was higher than predicted. For the year of 2022, the CPI index, also known as the underlying inflation rate, averaged at 1.7%. Netting out the government's one-time relief measures, the underlying inflation rate stood at 2%. 3 percentage points higher than that in November 2022. That's primarily owing to the rising cost of fresh vegetables and the narrowing of information and communication services. Among the greatest changes included the price for electricity, gas and water, which rose by more than 14% over 2 consecutive months. With Chinese New Year coming up soon, Chief Executive John Lee visited the Victoria Park Lunar New Year market this afternoon after touring a public housing estate in Tsing Yi this morning. Some residents said it was difficult to maintain their livelihoods and hoped the government would step up efforts to alleviate the plight. Timothy Lee has more.
With the Lunar New Year just 2 days away, Chief Executive John Lee joined local shoppers by visiting the popular flower fair at Victoria Park. Lee spoke casually to a few vendors, and he looked to purchase some flowers to celebrate the upcoming New Year. A pot of orchids worth $350 eventually won over the city's chief. Enthusiastic citizens took the opportunity to take photos with John Lee, many of them children. Lee said he was happy with the atmosphere of the fair and was thrilled to hear so much laughter coming from Hong Kongers. At around 11 this morning, the CE visited elderly residents living alone at Tsing Yi's Cheonghang estate. Cheers for the volunteers. Lee said he used to live in public housing himself and applauded the volunteers' work to bring familial warmth to the elderly residents. Together with the volunteers, the CE brought gift bags containing items such as canned abalone and New Year rice pudding to the seniors. But some of the elderly residents said the government should do more to alleviate their financial difficulties, including this 93-year-old woman who said she had to travel to Tsuen Wan just to buy more affordable vegetables. After his visit to Tsing Yi, Lee went to a market to purchase some Fai Chun, traditional New Year decorations displaying written phrases indicating luck and prosperity. He eventually bought several decorations totaling $168 and gave New Year greetings to shopkeepers and shoppers. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
3 people have been charged with conspiracy to defraud over a mirror concert incident at Hong Kong Coliseum last July. Sources say the trio were the staff members of Engineering Impact Limited, the main contractor of the concert of Hong Kong boy band Mirror. Police arrested 5 suspects last November for allegedly making false declarations about the weight of equipment used on the stage. Officers said 3 of the arrestees, aged between 41 and 60, will appear in Kowloon City Magistrates Courts on February the 2nd. Last July, a giant LED screen fell onto the stage while members of Mirror and dancers were performing. The incident resulted in injury to 2 dancers, including Mo Lee, who was still hospitalized for serious spinal injuries. A butcher at the Shengshui slaughterhouse died today after being injured by a meat cleaver at work. The accident happened at around 1 p.m. Sources say the butcher was about to kill a pig, supposedly knocked out with an electric stun gun at the time. The pig regained consciousness and kicked the man. The 61-year-old worker allegedly fell to the ground and passed out after being slashed by a 40-centimeter-long meat cleaver, reportedly on his left foot near an artery. More investigation is underway by the Labour Department and police. There's been a new development in the fatal shooting incident during the filming of the movie Rust over a year ago. Actor Alec Baldwin will be charged with involuntary manslaughter in the death of a cinematographer who died when a gun Baldwin was holding on set went off as they were preparing for a scene. Prosecutors say they want justice for the victim. NBC with this report.
With prosecutors calling his actions on the set of Rust criminal disregard for safety, Alec Baldwin now faces involuntary manslaughter and a firearm enhancement charge for his role in the death of cinematographer Helena Hutchins. The district attorney's bombshell announcement means if convicted on all charges, the famed actor could face up to 6.5 years in prison.
The gun was in his hand when he pulled the trigger, and that was the main action that killed Helena Hutchins.
Prosecutors say Baldwin is culpable as both a producer and as the actor who held the gun that killed Hutchins.
I let go of the hammer of the gun and the gun goes off.
Authorities now say they do not believe Baldwin's statement the gun misfired.
Alec Baldwin said he never pulled the trigger on the handgun that fired. Do you believe that?
That's not true. And we know that from the FBI lab report. That gun would not have fired without the trigger having been pulled.
Calling today's announcement a terrible miscarriage of justice, Baldwin's attorney says, "We will fight these charges and we will win."
Do you think someone should go to prison over all of the evidence you've reviewed?
Prison is not necessarily the goal. What I want is justice for Helena Hutchins, and I want people to take responsibility and take accountability for what their actions or inactions led to.
After sorting through a trove of evidence that included body camera footage, police interviews, and forensic testing of the gun, the DA is also charging the movie's armorer, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, with involuntary manslaughter, which her attorneys call the result of a very flawed investigation.
This was something that was more than mere negligence. It was people acting recklessly, people not doing their jobs, violating all of the standards that we all have to follow if we have a gun in our hands.
Prosecutors say Dave Halls, the assistant director who looked at the gun before it was given to Baldwin, cut a plea deal with the DA for a lesser charge, getting probation after agreeing to testify against Baldwin and Gutierrez-Reed.
He's going to testify to the truth. He's not out to get anyone. He's going to testify to the truth.
Tonight, a movie set tragedy, and now the real-life consequences for the actor, the armorer, and the assistant director, who authorities say should have all prevented the deadly shooting.
British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is reportedly under investigation from the police after he rode in a car without wearing his seatbelt in order to film a clip for social media.
One of my New Year's promises to you was to grow the economy, and today we're announcing the second round of allocations from our Levelling Up Fund, and that's about...
In the clip, Sunak discussed the government's latest round of funding to level up communities around the country. It was widely shared on social media as Sunak addressed the camera from the back of a car without wearing a seatbelt. According to the UK government website, you can be fined £500 for not wearing a seatbelt when you're supposed to. Sunak has apologised for an error of judgment, a Downing Street spokesperson said. Western allies are meeting in Germany today to discuss weapon support for Kiev as Russia steps up military action in the Ukraine's east. Talks are expected to focus on Germany's hesitance to supply Ukraine with Leopard 2 main battle tanks, with Berlin reluctant to provoke Moscow. The United States and Britain have already pledged to send armoured vehicles to Ukraine. Nazmi Karim reports.
There is no shortage in Europe of Leopard 2 battle tanks that Ukraine is desperate to get their hands on in their war against Russia. More than a dozen countries have stocks they are willing to hand over to Kiev. However, they must first obtain approval from Germany, the maker of the advanced weapon, which can hit a target from up to 5 kilometers and are seen as crucial to Ukraine's war effort to prevent Russian troops from regrouping during the winter.
If you have a tank on the other side opposing you, you better have a tank. So I think it is in terms of matching what the enemy has, it is important for the Ukrainians. And in terms of their ambition to regain their own territory, what was taken from the Russians, a tank is an important weapon system.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, alluding to Germany's hesitance, said he was still waiting for a decision from one European capital that will activate the prepared chains of cooperation on tanks. With Sweden and Finland vowing to send military aid, Western allies are meeting on Friday at the Ramstein air base in Germany, with the discussions expected to revolve around the Leopard tanks. Reuters reports that Poland could send its Leopards to Ukraine even without re-export approval from Germany, with some countries putting pressure on Berlin to give the green light. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is expected to chair the meeting.
Well, there are dozens of countries that have the Leopard tanks. I think that the Secretary's objective here is to secure and work with our partners and allies to get Ukraine the capabilities and the requests that it has for what it needs on the battlefield.
In South Korea, firefighters battled a fire which broke out in a shanty town in the capital Seoul today. 500 people were evacuated. The fire started around 6:30 a.m. in Guryong village in southern Seoul, which is home to 600 households in Gangnam. 800 firefighters, police officers and public workers fought the flames and handled evacuations. President Yoon Suk-yeol called for all-out efforts to minimize the damage. So far, about 60 homes have been destroyed in the densely packed neighborhood. And that's the news. Thanks for watching.